Stay tuned at the end of this podcast for a taste of a groundbreaking debut of audio drama featuring innovative Dolby 3D audio production. Hindsight, the Day Before, produced by Mark Haynes Productions and Radio Pictures. The all-star cast includes Santiago Cabrera, Sibingao Malambo, Ian Anthony Dale, MC Gainey, Nolan Gerard Funk, Marin Dungy, Aaron Stanford, and John Goodman. Hindsight, the Day Before is now available wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
Criminology is a true crime podcast that may contain discussion about violent or disturbing topics. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 319 of the Criminology podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson.
And this is Mike Morford.
So, Mr. Morford, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. I'm on my third cup of coffee today, so I'm feeling pretty alert and ready to go. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm on my first. We are taping, in the morning, and you tend to get up earlier than I do, but yeah, it's going to be a good day.
I'm ready to go.
Well, let's go ahead and give our Patreon shout outs. We had Karen Dahl and Helen Radford. So great new support. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that support. It really helps us out. And for anyone else that would like to help the show, please go over to patreon.com/criminology to get signed up.
And just a reminder, we mentioned recently that we're already making plans to attend CrimeCon 2025 in Colorado, and we definitely want to see you there.
CrimeCon is the world's greatest true crime convention, and it's taking place in Denver, Colorado, September 5th through the 7th, 2025, at the Gaylord Rockies Resort and Convention Center. If you've been to CrimeCon before, you know there are endless things to do, and you can rub elbows with your favorite people from the world of true crime. And of course, you can come see us on Podcast Row and come to our annual Criminology TCAT meetup.
And if you are going to CrimeCon, why not save a few bucks by using our promo code when you get your pass? Just head over to crimecon.com and use our promo code Criminology at checkout to save 10% on your standard badges. We hope to see you there. So now that we have all of that out of the way, let's jump into this week's case. In this episode, we are covering a case that unfolded in 2015 in which a Connecticut woman named Connie Dabate was murdered in what appeared to be a home invasion burglary. But as police dug deeper, it seemed that things were not as they appeared, and they relied on a variety of tools to help lay out the truth, including social media, cell phone data, surveillance camera footage, computer files, and one of the biggest tools of all in their quest for the truth turned out to be a Fitbit fitness tracker.
The morning of December 23rd, 2015 started the same way as any other morning did for the Dabate family, other than the excitement of Christmas in the air. Richard and Connie Dabate lived on Birchview Drive with their two young sons, Richard Jr. and Connor, in Ellington, Connecticut, 20 miles north of Hartford. They had been married for over a decade and started building their family together. Connie, the family's main breadwinner, was a pharmaceutical sales representative, and Richard worked for a computer company. According to Connie's friend, Allie Clarks, in a People magazine article, Connie was always the first to volunteer for anything, whether it was class mom, PTA, anything for her friends. 39-year-old Connie was the responsible one in the relationship, while Richard, who was just 1 year older, was the overgrown kid. Despite their differences, those who knew them best said they were a really solid couple that had made it work. Friends of Connie's recall arguments over money and stress over finances, but nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary for a married couple raising kids. Aside from the rising cost of living, which was impacting many families, everything seemed perfect.
So to me, it's interesting, to hear a family friend say that Connie was the responsible one and Richard was the overgrown kid. I'm sure there are a lot of couples like that, where there are major differences, whether it's in how people act, how they, parent. Sometimes you have one parent who's the strict parent, and one, is described as the fun parent. Well, who doesn't want to be the fun parent? But none of that works all the time. You have to have a little bit of both, right? Both parents can't be overgrown kids. Things are going to fall apart pretty quickly. And then this talk of, arguments over money, stress over finances. I mean, what couple, Morph, hasn't had that during a relationship or marriage? I mean, that just is par for the course.
Yeah, I think that's a common thing, especially, if you have young children and there's a lot more cost involved. So anytime things get tough financially, a lot of people do have some arguments. That's to be expected. But it sounds like from what the friends are saying, everything seems good from the outside looking in with this couple. But of course, I think we all know that not everything about every couple is known by their friends. There's some things that are kept secret, or, issues they might have in their marriage aren't always reflected to where people can see them.
Yeah, no doubt. And I would say not just couples. I would expand that to just about everyone. As well as you might know someone, do you really know everything about them? And I would say a lot of times that's pretty tough. People show you what they want to show you, and they keep hidden what they want to keep hidden. Neighbors were shocked when authorities swarmed their quiet street proceeding to the Dabate home. An alarm on the home security system was activated at 10:11 that morning. The security company alerted Connecticut State Police via 911 at 10:16 a.m. 4 minutes later, with authorities on the way, Richard Dabate called 911. He reported that he and Connie had been victims of a home invasion. Tragically, Connie had been killed by the intruder, shot to death with a gun from the Dabate home. Luckily, their sons had been in school during the attack. On a normal day, neither Connie nor Richard would be at home at that time either. Connie took an exercise class at the local YMCA, and Richard, a computer technician, was usually at work. It wasn't until Connie got to the Indian Valley YMCA that morning that she realized her class had been canceled. So she decided to turn around and go home. About 5 minutes into Richard's 40-minute drive to work, he realized that he had left his laptop at home. He also decided to turn around and go home, and according to him, that's when the nightmare unfolded.
Richard told police that he had arrived back at the home before Connie, between 8:45 and 9 a.m. He was grabbing his work laptop and making sure he wasn't forgetting anything else when he heard a noise upstairs. The house was empty other than him, but they did have cats, so he wasn't immediately on guard. He headed up the stairs to investigate the sound and found the source of the noise, a tall man about 6'2", wearing camouflage clothes, gloves, and a mask over his face. The stranger was in a closet, looking through Connie's jewelry. According to Richard, though the intruder was unarmed, he was no match for the man physically. The man ordered Richard around in a voice that he described as similar to the actor Vin Diesel, who has a pretty distinct deep voice. Richard, in a recorded police interview, said of the assailant, "He said something about my kids. I can't remember what, but it was threatening." The man reportedly demanded cash, credit cards, debit cards, and their PIN numbers. While the two were still upstairs, Richard heard the sound of their garage door opening. It was Connie returning home early from her fitness class at the YMCA. As she entered the home, Richard said he desperately yelled out for her to run. Connie had no idea what she was coming home to, and Richard said he wanted to protect her.
And my first thought, Morph, is how scary this situation would be. You come home, you hear something, you go upstairs to investigate, and you find an intruder in your home. But, the one thing that jumped out to me was Richard saying that although the intruder was unarmed, he was no match for this guy physically. And I get that, right? Some people are bigger than others, more muscular, whatever it is. But at a certain point, if you knew that this person was unarmed and you knew that your wife was walking into the home, would you not try to do something? That's the thought that entered my mind. other than just yell out to your wife? Would you try to, get into an altercation with this person to help save her?
Yeah, I'd like to think that I would, for sure, at least try and stall him, maybe jump at him as he's trying to go out the doorway, whatever it may be, to give my wife time to react and hopefully get away. So, this seems a little bit suspicious, at least to me, that he wouldn't try and confront this guy physically just to give his wife time to help her.
According to Richard, a panicked Connie darted down into the basement and the intruder followed. He wasn't going to allow any chance for her to raise the alarm. From the basement, Richard heard shots ring out. Ballistics would later prove that a .357 Magnum that Richard had purchased just months earlier but had never fired was used to shoot Connie twice, once in the stomach and once in the back of the head. She was killed almost instantly by the headshot. According to Richard, the intruder then turned his attention back to him. Richard claimed that the killer, using a box cutter from the Dabate's home, stabbed him in the legs multiple times. He also used zip ties to secure one of Richard's wrists and one of his ankles to a folding chair in the basement so that he could torture him with a blowtorch taken from Richard's toolbox in the basement. Richard claimed that the pain from the flame was too much for him to take, and he decided to fight back. The two struggled over the blowtorch, and in the process, the intruder's face was burned, and he fled from the home. So the first thing that came to my mind, Morph, was that it was kind of like a real Richard Kimball fugitive vibe here. The story that Richard was telling just didn't seem to ring true to me. There seems to be holes in it. A killer shooting Connie, then grabbing a box cutter to stab Richard in the legs. I mean, that jumped out at me. And then this blowtorch. If you have a .357 Magnum and you've just shot and killed a woman, why are you then turning to box cutters and blowtorches when attacking the man inside the home? Also, Richard's statement that when this man was using the blowtorch on him, that was the final straw. That was when he decided to fight back. I don't know. It just doesn't ring true.
Yeah, to me, the story sounds like complete nonsense. The whole scenario of first he's unarmed up in the bedroom with Richard, yet somehow manages to run out. And by the time he gets down to the basement, he has a gun now and he kills Connie. And then to come up once he's killed her, it seems logical that he wouldn't want to leave a witness. So he would just kill Richard as well. But instead he decides he's going to torture him and do all these other things. And it sounds like complete nonsense to me. And I think the police probably thought so too when they were hearing this story.
And the one thing that Richard doesn't really explain, or at least, we don't have the information, is how did he get down into the basement? Did he chase the intruder who, for whatever reason, is going after Connie? I'm with you, Morph. I think you can just picture a detective listening to this story and not believing it.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of cases where police get something in their mind and stick to it, and they go down a certain direction and don't look at anything else. And I don't think you should do that as an investigator. And if police doubted his story in this case, you almost can't blame them. Richard claimed that he was injured, terrified, and heartbroken, but managed to crawl up the stairs, dragging the folded chair behind him. He finally managed to call 911 at 10:20 a.m. He was found moaning on the floor in the kitchen by firefighters, and he was taken to an ambulance outside the home to have his injuries looked at. According to Yahoo News, Richard told first responders, "They're still in the house." Connie was pronounced dead at the scene, and Richard was still zip-tied to the chair, and he had a zip tie around his neck, but it wasn't digging into his skin. Besides the stab wounds, Richard had no bumps or bruises that may indicate he was in a struggle. Compared to what happened to Connie, Richard's injuries seem minimal, and I think like many of our listeners probably are at this point, investigators assessing the crime scene were immediately suspicious of Richard's story.
Detectives found that the jewelry that the intruder was supposedly rifling through was all still sitting in its place, and all drawers in the home had been found closed, which is pretty unusual for someone rifling through drawers looking for valuables. They typically dump drawers out. If the home had been burgled, it had been very carefully searched, not ransacked. If Richard interrupted the intruder looking through a drawer, the intruder took the time to close it before taking control of the situation. It was becoming clear to police that Richard's story did not match what they were seeing at the scene. Police reached out to local hospitals to see if anyone had been treated for facial burns following the attack, but found no such patients. Back at the Dabate home, multiple canine scent dogs only picked up Richard's scent at the scene, leading to the ambulance he was taken to after authorities arrived. It's noted in the warrant that these efforts produced no indication by Canine Rocky that an individual had fled the property on foot. Investigators also couldn't find any sign that anything had been taken. Richard's wallet, which the intruder had demanded from him, was found in the backyard of the home, with all of its contents still inside. The only anomaly was that there was a small pile of paper and potentially other items that had been burned in the basement, almost as if someone had been trying to start a fire.
Police didn't shy away from coming out and stating that they were suspicious of Richard Dabate in his wife's murder. According to People magazine, a spokesman for the Connecticut State Police would say that Richard's version of events made no sense. Richard's behavior after Connie's murder didn't help lessen any suspicions. Connie was laid to rest in Ellington Center Cemetery. Connie's friends recall that Richard had no trouble leaving her grave after the funeral, and that he was barely present during the luncheon after her funeral. Though everyone grieves differently, they couldn't help but feel like something wasn't quite right with the way he was acting. Everyone seemed heartbroken and in complete disbelief except for Richard. Now, not only did the police suspect that Richard was involved in Connie's murder, but friends were starting to think that as well. For his part, Richard attempted to look like a grief-stricken husband, writing on Facebook, "The volume of loving friends, family, and acquaintances who we saw at services is a testament at how much she touched the lives of others. Our friends and neighbors have also been shown an amazing amount of support. To all of you, I say thank you, and Connie thanks you."
And Morph, I think this comes up in a lot of cases. How does a person act in the wake of a tragedy? And you and I have talked about it before, right? Everyone acts a little differently, but there are many times that, friends and family view the actions of someone as not being quite right. And I think that's what we're seeing here with Richard. Could it be that a person is still in shock and they're not showing the emotion that others think they should be? Yeah, it definitely could be. But could it also be that the person's not in shock, they're not devastated, but they don't know how to even put on the act? They can't do it. And maybe that's what we're seeing here.
And I think these are all people that know Richard, not outsiders looking in, judging how he's acting. So maybe they got a sense that he's not acting the way he normally would react to something of this magnitude, or a personal loss. Maybe they could see that something was off with him, knowing him and knowing how he acted on a regular basis.
Well, I think that's a great point. That's different than, let's say, millions of viewers watching Chris Watts, and saying he's not acting right. I always use Chris Watts as an example because it stood out to me, and it stood out to many people. The way that guy was acting didn't seem right. But as you said, these are people that know Richard. And so I would think even more so, they would be tuned in to any odd behavior on his part. Stay tuned at the end of this podcast for a taste of a groundbreaking debut of audio drama featuring innovative Dolby 3D audio production. Hindsight, the Day Before, produced by Mark Haynes Productions and Radio Pictures. The all-star cast includes Santiago Cabrera, Sibengao Malambo, Ian Anthony Dale, MC Gainey, Nolan Gerard Funk, Marin Dungy, Aaron Stanford, and John Goodman. Hindsight, the Day Before is now available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And Morph and I really think you're going to want to check this out. The spatial sound, the audio production, when you've got your headphones on, this thing blows you away. The cast is amazing. And the story is going to pull you in. It's mysterious. It's dark, dangerous. There's murder. Throw in a little Harry Houdini, and you got one heck of an audio drama. This level of audio production is way beyond anything that I've ever encountered. I think you're going to be blown away. Richard went out to bars and restaurants and had friends over to the house. When he ran into any of Connie's friends around town, he would quickly find a way to avoid them, but had no problem texting them for things that seemed odd, like asking where you could get takeout, despite the fact that he had lived in Ellington for years. Richard tried to collect the $475,000 from Connie's life insurance policy on December 28th, just 5 days after she had been killed. The company denied the claim. He had stopped paying for his own policy that would have benefited Connie in the event of his death 2 full years before her murder, but kept paying for Connie's policy. And it seems as though we just keep hearing about things on Richard's part that are suspicious. If you've lived in the same place for many, many years, you don't need to text people to find out where to get takeout. You already know the answer to that question. And then obviously trying to collect on Connie's life insurance just 5 days after she had been killed is going to raise a red flag to many people.
And playing devil's advocate, trying to collect on the money, maybe they had bills and, he didn't want to have falling behind bills on his mind on top of everything else. But, I agree, like a lot of people, this does look like he's out to get that money. But one thing I also want to play devil's advocate on is in canceling his life insurance, but not canceling Connie's policy. She was the main breadwinner. So maybe if they were trying to cut cost, it would make sense maybe to cut his policy, but not hers, because if something happened to her, the money for the family would be needed to replace her income since she was a primary breadwinner. So, you could make the argument for sure it does look suspicious, but there are also reasons why he may have done that to help the family.
No, and I think it's good to point out both sides like you're doing. And for me, a lot of times, you can look at one thing and see a different side of it. I think what starts to happen in many of these cases, though, is that things just keep building and building and building. Like there's so many things that this person is doing, where if it was just one thing, okay, maybe you are able to explain it away. But it's so much that it just becomes almost impossible to explain everything away.
In January 2016, just weeks after the murder, Richard canceled the subscription to the security company that enabled his home surveillance and alarm system. Just 12 days after someone supposedly broke into the home and attacked him and killed his wife, he felt a security system was no longer needed. This also added to suspicions of him. Then he withdrew $90,000 from Connie's Fidelity investment account. To police, this was just one more check in a box that seemed to indicate that Richard had something to do with his wife's murder. It wasn't a mystery to them. They felt they knew who murdered Connie, but they just needed to connect the dots and prove that Richard was responsible. But this wasn't something they could do fast. It required a lot of patience and work. People in the community remained uneasy as they waited for answers. Gus Falcanis, the owner of the Chuck Wagon restaurant in Ellington, told the Hartford Courant, "People are concerned. They don't know what's going on." Waitress Betty Angeloni explained that customers were concerned because they just haven't heard anything. Some residents began to arm themselves, fearing the unknown attacker, and resident Pete Moretti told the paper everyone was kind of nervous in the neighborhood.
It wasn't until April 2017 that answers finally came. That's when Richard Dabate was arrested for Connie's murder. Officers were careful to make sure he was not handcuffed in front of his sons, knowing that they had already lost their mom, and now they were about to lose their dad. Richard was also charged with making false statements to police and tampering with evidence. According to Patch.com, a warrant in the case read that the investigation was long and exhaustive. Richard insisted that he had not killed his wife of 12 years. According to People magazine, in court, his attorney said, "My client is innocent of these charges, and he looks forward to being vindicated after a trial." Richard's bond was set at $1 million, which he was quickly able to post after his family put up 4 of their properties as collateral.
Since Connie had been murdered, Richard gave several different versions of what happened that fateful morning, but finally seemed to stick with the events as follows. Earlier that day, he walked their 2 sons to the bus stop and then finished getting ready for work. In one version, he left around 8:30 while Connie was still getting ready for her fitness class. And in another, they left the home at the same time and he saw her backing out of the driveway. Either during his drive back for his laptop or as he arrived home, he got a text message alert about an alarm at the home. He was fighting with the intruder upstairs when Connie entered the house, and the attacker decided to follow her into the basement, which she immediately ran to upon hearing Richard yell. The suspect walked down the stairs and into the basement. Richard, in a panic, ran behind the intruder and fell down the stairs. While getting up, he heard 1 gunshot and then didn't hear anything for about 5 minutes. According to ConnecticutInsider.com, in one recounting, Richard said to the police, "I can't get it out of my head. It was the loudest bang he had ever heard."
And earlier we talked about, why wouldn't he fight with the intruder? Well, now he's saying that he did. And I think a lot of people are always suspicious when, someone gives multiple different versions of an event. And my thought is, in some of the questions that we had, does a person hear those same questions from detectives, or do they realize at some point that my story needs to answer some of these questions? Why wouldn't I have fought with the attacker? And so at some point, the narrative gets changed so that it does better align with what people would think someone would do. That's kind of the thought that I have.
Yeah, my thinking is usually the truth is always going to be the same because it's the truth. You just lay out the details as they happen. There shouldn't be really any changes. But when you lie about something and then you change lies to account for other things or to explain away things, the story starts to unravel and you have to remember what was said before to cover that lie. And I think that's where you get different stories going on from the same person. And it's, seems like something that it's easy to spot these changing accounts.
Other versions of the story had Richard actually witnessed the shooting, be pushed down the stairs by the suspect, or alternatively led by the attacker, who was pulling him by his wrists. Then the intruder was pointing a gun at him, forcing him to allow the zip ties to be secured around his wrist and ankle. He and the intruder wrestled over the blowtorch. The intruder's face was burned, and it caused him to flee. Richard was able to crawl upstairs and press the panic button on the alarm panel. The problem with all of Richard's claims is that really none of it was possible. Authorities were able to gather data from Connie Dabate's Fitbit and cell phone, and from Richard's cell phone and computer, and it all told a very different story. District Attorney Craig Stedman of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, chimed in on the use of Fitbit to help tell the story. He once used Fitbit data in a case to prove that a woman had lied when she said someone broke into her home and sexually assaulted her. Stedman told the Hartford Courant to say it is rare to use Fitbit records would be safe, adding, "It is a great tool for investigators to use."
The actual timeline in the murder was as follows. Connie left for her spin class at 8:46 a.m. She arrived at the YMCA at 8:53 and was captured by surveillance cameras there. She sent a Facebook message to a psychotherapist asking for an appointment where she could be hypnotized. According to the Hartford Courant, she made the request saying, "Because there's a lot going on right now." At 9:01, Richard was logging onto his computer from home. He sent his supervisor at work an email informing him that he'd be coming into the office a bit late today due to an alarm being activated at his house. He claimed that he had pulled over before heading back home so that he could email his boss, but the message was sent from his laptop. He wasn't too concerned about the activation, claiming that the system frequently registered false alarms.
At 9:18 a.m., Richard checked the Indian Valley YMCA's group fitness class schedule. Meanwhile, Connie was on the phone with someone and on her way home. Her Fitbit was idle for 9 minutes during the drive back home. By 9:23, when the alarm system logged the garage door opening, Connie was home and began walking around inside the home. Walking, not being chased. Her heartbeat was calm, not raised. She used her iPhone to post and scroll on Facebook between 9:40 and 9:46 a.m. Authorities know that she was home because her phone was using the IP address assigned to the house. All this time, her Fitbit had been measuring the distances she traveled. Between 9:18 and 10:05 a.m., which is when her Fitbit stopped recording activity, she had walked a total of 1,217 feet. But the distance from where her car was parked to the basement was only 125 feet. Her Fitbit stopped logging an hour after Richard claimed Connie had been killed. If she died while wearing the Fitbit and Richard was truthful, her heart rate would have been caught on the Fitbit stopping an hour earlier. Richard's story that she had arrived home and immediately ran down into the basement where she was killed wasn't backed up by the timeline, the distance, or by Connie's recorded heart rate, which was not elevated and did not indicate she had been running or scared at any time that morning.
The home security system, which logged everything, noted only one alarm activation that morning, which was from the panic button on Richard's keychain at 10:11 a.m. The alarm system was pretty extensive, and the information contained in the data is quite damning. During the time Richard said he was driving to work before realizing he forgot his laptop, he was actually home, fiddling with the alarm system. He armed and disarmed it several times. He disarmed it at 8:55 a.m., and 4 minutes later, the system logged the basement door opening and closing. This is without the garage or the front door opening, indicating that he had never left the home at all that morning. The system apparently had heat-detecting motion sensors that registered movement in the home that completely contradicted Richard's story. There were no signs of forced entry to the home, and no unusual movement, other than Richard arming and disarming the system.
And to me, Morph, this is really the heart of the case against Richard. I mean, this is a mountain of data contradicting his entire story. There's a lot of data coming from the home security system, which doesn't match pretty much anything that Richard said happened. And obviously you have the data from Connie's Fitbit, which is very damning. I mean, this thing, tracked her movements, it tracked her heart rate, and none of it matched Richard's story of her coming home, being alerted to an intruder, and running down into the basement. I mean, let's just talk about heart rate alone. If you walked into your home and your spouse yelled that there was an intruder, save yourself, your heart rate is going to spike. I mean, that would be an adrenaline-filled situation. And the data just didn't show it.
That makes me wonder if they didn't have this mountain of data to show what was really going on. I wonder how much harder it would have been for the police to build a case against him and prove that it didn't go down the way that he said it went down?
Well, I think it would have been a lot harder. Think about this case happening in the 1960s. You're not going to have all that stuff. It would have been much harder for police to disprove Richard's account of what happened that morning. But you and I talk a lot about advancements in DNA, and rightfully so. They've helped solve many, many cases, but there are a lot of other things that have advanced over the years, and we're talking about some of it here. Alarm systems, the data from your cell phone. I mean, they can tell that Connie was logged on to Facebook at a certain time. Not to mention the doorbell cameras that you and I have talked about extensively. There's just a lot of things in this modern world that are tracking what you're doing at a certain point in time. As far as ballistics, there was gunpowder residue on Richard's shirt, but not his hands. And his DNA was found on the gun, but not his fingerprints. Richard's phone records revealed much more in the way of clues. It proved that he had been having an affair for a long time, and now his mistress, a friend who had gone to high school with him, was pregnant. He told her that he and Connie were going to separate, and that they were, according to People magazine, on the same page with everything. He claimed that they were getting a slow-moving divorce to make it easier on the kids, who were 9 and 6 years old at the time.
None of Connie's friends reported her saying anything about a divorce. And the very next day, after Richard had sent that text to his girlfriend, Connie sent him a selfie of her wearing lingerie with a message indicating she wanted to be intimate with him, making it seem, at least in Connie's mind, that nothing was wrong in the marriage. One of Richard's friends claims that Richard was actually scared that Connie would divorce him when she found out about the affair. It seems safe to assume that Connie had no idea her husband of over a decade had been unfaithful. Richard had been lying to her about his whereabouts, claiming to be working late or hanging out with friends or playing cards. It also seems safe to say that she didn't know he had a baby on the way. Just 6 months after Richard learned of this pregnancy, Connie was dead.
So I think now we're really getting into the area of motive. We already talked about the almost $500,000 life insurance policy, but now we find out that Richard was having an affair and had a baby on the way. When speaking to police about the state of his marriage, Richard didn't claim they were getting divorced. Instead, he claimed that Connie was unable to have a third child that she longed for, so they decided to ask a family friend for help. According to People magazine, instead of asking her to be a surrogate, they decided to do something, quote, untraditional. She and Richard would have a child, and all three of them would co-parent together. It is possible that Richard was afraid that Connie would divorce him because there was proof she had wanted to in the past. A note on her iPhone from December 2014 was a list of reasons she wanted to divorce her husband. According to the Connecticut Mirror, the note was literally titled, "Why I Want a Divorce." Some of the reasons included the way he treated her, how bad of a parent he was, and a tendency to withdraw money from a lot of accounts that weren't in his name. She also noted the fact that he acts like a kid constantly. And here again, I think, we see another instance of Richard having to craft a story, come up with a narrative, that fits. Now, it doesn't make any sense to me and probably not to very many people listening. They want a third child, but instead of asking this woman to be a surrogate, she and Richard would have a child, and then the three of them would co-parent. I mean, who in the world is going to believe that story? But he's got to come up with something more to explain this affair and this baby on the way.
There are certain religions that men may have multiple partners or wives and then have babies with those different wives, and they're supposed to support and interact with each other, but there's no evidence that that was the case here. No evidence at all that Connie knew about this or would condone it. And of course, with her being dead, she couldn't counter what he was telling the police.
Well, and the other thing is you don't have a single person that I'm aware of coming forward and saying, oh yeah, that was the plan. Connie told me about it, or, anything like that. You know why? Because it's not true.
Richard used one credit card, which Connie didn't even know about, to spend $1,200 at a strip club called the Electric Blue Cafe. He also used the card to stay at a Motel 6 and buy flowers for his girlfriend. Many of their messages between Richard and Connie were lovey-dovey. Connie called Richard Sweet Pea and Buttercup, and he professed his love for her. But many of the messages were also about money troubles. In a text conversation from December 22nd, the day before she was killed, Connie was clearly angry with Richard over a cable bill. Their bill had gone up, now costing double, because Richard decided to add the sports package without telling Connie. Connie spent hours on the phone with Comcast trying to cancel it and straighten out the billing. In the text, she was upset that she, quote, once again, had to clean up his mess. Her final text to him read, "Great day off and Merry fucking Christmas." That same night, Richard texted his girlfriend saying, "I'll see you tomorrow, my little love nugget."
Well, I think it's clear that, Connie was upset with Richard at certain times over the way he acted, the way that he spent money. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And she didn't even know that he spent the $1,200 at a strip club. First of all, who spends $1,200 at a strip club? And imagine if she was upset about the sports package, how upset she would have been about the $1,200.
Yeah, and I think it's just a further indication as you start peeling back these layers, you're seeing deception on Richard's part.
Yeah, no doubt. There was a lot that he was keeping from his wife. Financially, the affair, all of it. Forced to acknowledge the affair and his marital problems, Richard finally told detectives this situation popped up like a frickin' soap opera. He admitted that the pregnancy was unexpected and that his girlfriend did think that he was going to divorce Connie. He even visited a divorce attorney on June 30th, 2015, but he didn't go through with a retainer or a divorce petition. Sarah Ganser, the woman who Richard had the affair with and who was pregnant with his child at the time of Connie's murder, was shocked. She didn't believe for a second that Richard was going to divorce Connie. Sarah and Richard met in junior high school and had been friends for 30 years. They spent many of those years in an on-again, off-again relationship, but it only became physically intimate in May 2015. Sarah learned she was pregnant the very next month. It all happened very quickly.
When Sarah learned that she was pregnant, she figured she would end up alone and raising the baby by herself. When the child was born, Richard wasn't there. She hadn't even been telling her family about Richard, though they knew she was pregnant. She only admitted it to her own mother after Connie's murder, when she knew it would become public news anyway. Sarah had no idea that Richard had been planning to kill Connie, and he hadn't said anything to her about it after the murder either. According to Yahoo News, any complaints Richard made about Connie or the stress of his marriage went in one ear and out of the other. Some of her Facebook messages contradicted this sort of distanced version of events, however. She was very aware that he was stressed out about the situation. She messaged one friend on Facebook saying, "He's going to lose so many friends. He never thought he'd be the kind of person who would have people hate him. If his parents reject him for this, where will he live? He's going to be broke. He's already so worked up."
To prosecutors, this is really the key to this murder. Richard wanted Connie gone, whether it was because he felt pressured by Sarah to leave her or really wanted to start a family with her, but he didn't want the community, Connie's family, their friends, and his own parents to look at him differently. He wanted to stay in the same house. He didn't want to pay any alimony or child support or have to pay for any of his debts or impulsive purchases without using Connie's money. He wanted to kill her and look like he was a victim too, so that no one would judge him for moving on with his, quote, new girlfriend. Sarah Ganser filed for full custody of their child in October of 2021. Marlee Shaw, Connie's sister, who was the executor of her sister's estate, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Richard in November of 2017. She was requesting the money from the Fidelity investment account, which he took from Connie's estate after her death, as well as unspecified damages. And I think this is what we see in so many cases, right? Men wanting out of a relationship, sometimes women, but I think more often than not men, they don't want to pay any alimony. They don't want to have to pay child support, but they want out of the relationship. And this is so often a motive for people killing their spouses.
And for me, every time we talk about one of these cases, it just boggles my mind how someone could think it's a better idea to try and kill somebody and get away with the murder than it is to just cut the cord and divorce and try and start over and pick up the pieces. It just, I can't wrap my head around that. In early 2020, a jury was picked for the trial, but the COVID-19 pandemic brought the court system to a screeching halt. In June, Richard's attorney passed away unexpectedly. The jury was dismissed in August 2021. At least one of the jurors had moved out of state by then, and they all had plenty of time to hear about the case. A new jury selection was required, and Richard needed a new attorney. That new jury was finally seated in February 2022, and the case was scheduled for trial. 130 witnesses testified, and the jury had to piece together 600 exhibits over 22 days of trial. On the stand, Richard denied shooting Connie with his gun or stabbing himself in the legs with his own box cutter. State's attorney Matthew Gdansky said to Richard, "You were trying to make a bloody crime scene, were you not?" But Richard denied this allegation, despite there being 90-degree drops of blood on his pants.
The prosecution pointed out that the .357 used to kill Connie was purchased just months before the murder, and the address Richard used was a P.O. box, not his home address. It's likely that Connie had no idea he even had a firearm. They often argued over money, and it was probably just another expensive purchase he kept from her, knowing she wouldn't agree to it in the first place. Richard took the stand in his own defense, saying, "I loved two women, and I didn't want to push either of them away." Richard's new defense attorney, Trent Lalima, said to the Huffington Post, "I think we put on a very strong case for why Rick did not commit this offense." State's attorney Matthew Gdansky pushed back on that, telling the court, "The evidence in this case was strong, and it was made even stronger by the defendant's motive."
Though the trial was referred to in the media as the Fitbit Murder, according to People magazine, Wayne Rowe, a family friend who served as spokesperson for Connie's family, said, "The trial was not about Fitbit. It was about the cold-blooded, planned murder of Connie Margada Dabate." State's attorney Matthew Gdansky backed that up. According to Connecticut Insider, he said, "This was a cold, methodical plan to avoid the consequences of his infidelity." In the end, on May 10, 2022, a jury found Richard Dabate guilty on all three counts: first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and false statements. He faced 60 years in prison on the murder charge alone. After his conviction, his bond was raised to $5 million. Wayne Rowe, the family spokesperson, told the Huffington Post, "There will be no closure for the Margada family, but there is finally justice for Connie." And Kim Phillips, one of Connie's best friends, told Fox 61 News, "I don't think it will ever bring closure to family and friends, because we'll never have her back."
And we heard this word closure a lot. And I think for a lot of, the victim's family members, there really is no closure. You heard one of Connie's best friends say it. There's no closure because we'll never have her back. Now, there's justice when a killer is convicted and sentenced and all of that. But I think this notion of closure and the word itself is used a lot, but I don't think it's always used properly, or it really doesn't come about as often as I think people believe it does.
Yeah, and I think it's a word that gets thrown around, too often. And to your point, there's can't be closure. That person's gone forever. And even if they get justice, they still have that loss in their life that they'll have to think about for the rest of their lives.
All of the data presented in the case helped sway the jury's decision. This is an interesting case for a variety of reasons. One of them is that you have a suspect who was a computer technician and had such a sophisticated home security system and still felt that he would be able to lie about the entire timeline of events. He thought that using Google Voice instead of his cell phone number to text his girlfriend would keep it hidden from Connie and from authorities. He also didn't consider the Fitbit playing the role that it did. And this was something that jumped out at me. As we were going through the research, you have, a person in Richard Dabate who I'm sure was fairly intelligent, but he was also pretty computer savvy, yet didn't seem to understand that all of this data was going to contradict this story that he concocted.
It almost makes you wonder how planned out this actually was, because while he had an elaborate story, he almost didn't account for any of this data that helped convict him.
And you would think a computer technician would be more savvy than most, right? When it comes to data and, was it going to show? But he didn't seem to take any of that into account. In addition to the data was the affair. The jury didn't buy it. Jury foreperson Valerie Bonnet confirmed that the data was the most important factor in the guilty verdict, but the affair too was very powerful in swaying them. She told NBC Connecticut, all of us were like, no matter, how gracious you are, and no matter how much you want a child, we couldn't swallow that Connie would be okay with an ongoing affair.
On August 18, 2022, Richard Dabate was sentenced to 65 years in prison, 5 more years than the prosecution asked for, and only 1 year less than the maximum the family asked for. 60 years for the murder, 5 years for tampering with evidence, and a concurrent year for the false statements. The victim impact statements of Connie's family and friends were taken into consideration in the sentencing. Before announcing the sentence, Judge Corrine Klatt said, "The world is truly a lesser place without Connie in it. I can't replace Connie in your lives. If I could order that, I would certainly do it." The judge also explained that the nature of this offense was brutal. It was calculated. It was an incomprehensible act.
Rather than accept responsibility or show any remorse, Richard responded to the judge, saying, "I'm here before you as an innocent man. I will never stop fighting for justice for my wife, Connie, who I think about every single day." Defense attorney Trent LaLima announced Richard's intention to appeal the verdict and the sentence. So even after being confronted with this mountain of evidence, even after the jury's decision, Richard Dabate is defiant. I mean, he continued to say that he was an innocent man. But I think it's hard more for anyone to look at the evidence against him and view it the same way that he does. So Connie's killer, her own husband, is in prison where he belongs. I think most people believe that. But Connie's family, as so many victims' families are, were left to pick up the pieces. Connie's brother, Keith Margata, told People magazine, "As a family, we can move forward." Connie's friend, Allie Clark, told the magazine, "I feel for the boys because they'll have to grow up knowing that their father killed their mother. How do you deal with that?" They were not only left with a heavy emotional burden at such a young age, there was no inheritance left for them. The boys now live with Connie's older sister, Leslie Garabedian, and her family, and there's no doubt their lives will never be the same. Their father, Richard Dabate Jr., is currently serving his time at McDougall Walker Correctional Institution in Suffield, Connecticut.
While the electronic data is what made headlines in this case, State's Attorney Matthew Gdansky told the court this was another case of domestic violence. Though much progress has been made in recent years to support victims and survivors and to hold abusers accountable, these domestic violence homicides are still happening, so we must continue to work together to end domestic violence. Hopefully their efforts will help people going forward, but sadly it won't help Connie Dabate, mother of two, who was ambushed in her own home by the person who was supposed to love and protect her.
Yeah, as we wrap this case up more, Matthew Gdansky is absolutely right. This was called the Fitbit murder. That grabbed, a lot of the headlines. But there are so many cases like this that involve domestic violence. I talked about it earlier, right? One person wants out of a marriage, and very often it's the husband, doesn't want to pay alimony, doesn't want to give up, the children, doesn't want to give up anything, really. And selfishly makes the decision that rather than, have to pay out money or any of that, they're going to kill their spouse. And I think what you said really hits home, right? Connie Dabate was killed by the person who was supposed to love and protect her no matter what. And I think that's what makes some of these cases so shocking. When a spouse is murdered by, their husband or wife. I mean, you think about your own marriage. You're with that person in your home all the time. You sleep side by side at night. There is a lot of trust in a marriage. It's horrible anytime someone is killed, but doesn't it seem like there's an extra added element when someone is murdered by the person who's supposed to love them the most? There is, for me at least.
And not only did Richard murder Connie, but he left his kids without either of their parents, which is just, another terrible thing that he did. And I wonder, and we don't know, and we probably will never know, was there any conversation that day? Did Connie confront Richard and there was a conversation in the home? Or did he just walk up to her and shoot her without her knowing what was happening? How things actually went down that morning, we'll probably never know. And I'm curious about.
Well, I don't think we'll ever know because I don't think that Richard Dabate is capable of being honest about what happened. I really don't. You think about all of the different stories that he's told over the years. The fact that, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, he's able to stand up before the judge and continue to proclaim his innocence and then say he's going to fight for Connie. I mean, that's almost enough to make you sick, really, if you think about it. And I don't think I would believe anything that came out of his mouth if he did offer up additional details. How would you be able to believe him?
And hopefully for Connie's family, as we mentioned, they're never going to get closure, but hopefully they're at least satisfied that he's in prison where he belongs and he's never going to hurt anyone else.
Yeah, you have to take comfort in something, and hopefully they take comfort in that. But that's it for our episode on the Fitbit murder. If you love the show, but haven't done so yet, take a minute, go out, give us a rating, leave a review. Also, keep telling your friends. Word of mouth about the Criminology podcast goes a long way.
If you want to find us on social media, we're on X with the handle @CriminologyPod. You can also find us on Facebook by going to facebook.com/CriminologyPodcast. And you can join our Facebook discussion group, Criminology Podcast Discussion and Fans.
So that's it for another episode of Criminology, but Morph and I will be back with all of you next Saturday night with a brand new episode. So until then, for Mike
and Morph,
we'll talk to you next week.
Take care, everyone.
MHP and Radio Pictures.
January 6th, 1906. Harry Houdini, the handcuffed king, has done it again!
My name is Harry Houdini. If you have discovered these recordings, then there is every chance that I am no longer among the living.
Madam Koslova?
Mr. Houdini.
I have devoted much of my energy to debunking so-called spiritualism.
As a practicing medium, I have always been a fraud.
I have been able to unmask and debunk each and every case of communication from beyond the grave that I have taken on. But not the first one.
This seemed completely real.
My assassin is here!
My assassin is in this room with us! What's happening?
Stop.
What is happening?
Quiet!
Are you seriously speaking of the possibility of
supernatural effects? That is why we're asking for your assistance, Mr. Houdini.
The Koslova case led me to discover a world that exists alongside our own.
What on earth have you gotten yourself involved in, Harry?
It is this other world that I strive now to unmask. It has become my life's work, with Bess at my side.
I think it's time we beard the lion in his den.
Harry Houdini, the world-renowned magician, and now of all things, amateur sleuth.
Our work continues, and the danger increases every day.
Mr. Houdini, Mrs. Houdini, please back away. It's not safe. Not for anyone.
Harry?
Wait, darling!
This is getting deeper and darker by the second.
Santiago Cabrera.
Do we keep going?
Sibongile Malambo.
I think we have to. Carefully. Together.
Ian Anthony Dale. Very few persons are lucky enough to know where and when it will end for them. And John Goodman.
You must be careful, Harry. These people are evil incarnate.
Hindsight, the Day Before. An original premium audio drama. Presented in stunning spatial sound. Coming soon to your favorite podcast app.